As a college town, Lawrence has been seen as a liberal hub of Kansas, with many types of people cycling through. It has a prominent art scene, with musicians seen busking along Massachusetts Street and new art galleries popping up around town. To understand how it evolved, it's important to look back on the history of the music scene in Lawrence. During the 1960s, Lawrence was evolving and changing with the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. I spoke with KU alumni Debbie O'Neill, who came up to KU in 1967 and stayed until her graduation. She spoke on what KU was like in the 1960s and the impact of counterculture on her experience. The firebombings that impacted campus buildings, such as the Union and Strong Hall, weren't the only ones to be targeted. Debbie remembers having to practice firebomb drills in her sorority house. Due to the rise of counterculture and the push against the establishment, Greek life was often attacked. Many saw the Greek system as part of the establishment, and it was not rare for Molotov cocktails to be lit in front of the houses, resulting in the aforementioned firebomb drills. The counterculture movement meant the rejection of society's codes and norms. Some of the common themes of the time were drug use, atheism, sexual liberation, and political activism. This eventually gave birth to the hippie movement, where capitalistic values were rejected and many opposed wars. It also led to the development of many artistic trends influenced by the Beat Generation writers, such as rock and roll and electronic music. The music of this period often had anti-war themes and the overarching messages of love. There were many popular music groups in the Lawrence area that college kids would see at one of the local venues. One such venue was the Red Dog Inn. The Red Dog Inn was located on Massachusetts Street and evolved into a disco club called Bugsy's in the 70s. It is now known as Liberty Hall and is a venue for many live acts and movies. Debbie was often in attendance at the Red Dog Inn to go dancing and listening to the live music. She remembers going to the nightclub to see local bands such as King Midas and the Mufflers, an 8-piece group billed the king of the show bands. The group had evolved to an 8-piece in 1966, but began in 1965 as a 4-piece group. She would also go see the club's house band, the Red Dogs, who were originally named The Limits, but went through a rename after becoming the house band. These weren't the only groups in the area to gain notoriety. The Blue Things, a folk rock band who operated from 1964 to 1968, is remembered as one of the best bands to come out of the Midwest in the 1960s. Following in their footsteps, the Fabulous Flippers, who formed in Hays, Kansas, was a local horn show soul band who recorded 8 singles, 1 LP or long play, and 1 EP or extended play during their run. They performed at the Minnesota State Fair in 1966, and in 1970 they broke the all-time attendance record at Iowa's Darlo Olson's Roof Garden Ballroom, drawing over 6,000 teens. They are credited as the group that had the biggest impact on Mid-America in the 1960s. In 1969, a band called The Reasons Why was formed in Topeka, Kansas, and would play gigs in the surrounding areas. In 1970, the band decided to rename to Kansas, and went on to release 9 gold albums, 4 platinum albums, and a million-selling single. They also appeared on the U.S. Billboard charts for over 200 weeks in the 1970s and 80s. They are best known for their songs Dust in the Wind and Carry On Wayward Son, which was frequently played throughout the CW's hit show Supernatural and is hailed as the unofficial theme song of the show. Despite many of the original members having passed away or retired, Kansas is still performing as of 2023. The University of Kansas also produced some notable characters, such as Spider and the Crabs, who formed out of the Sigma Chi fraternity, and Mike Finnegan, who as a solo act toured with Jimi Hendrix, Etta James, Cher, Ringo Starr, and Tracy Chapman, among others. Finnegan attended KU on a basketball scholarship. While there, he formed the Surfs with his classmates. The Surfs were a blues band that formed in 1965. The music scene in Kansas was a slow-growing one, but was prominent nonetheless. In 1964, Charlie O'Finley, the owner of Kansas City Athletics at the time, became a record holder for paying the highest price ever for a single performance of a band. Finley paid $150,000 to book the Beatles for September 17, 1964. Though it took place on the Beatles' day off during their U.S. tour, this was the most they had ever made from a show at the time. The Beatles' discography is a great example of the subtle shift that the 60s takes with the rise of counterculture and drug use. The University Daily Kansan released an article in 2005 about counterculture at KU and said that the 60s introduced a counterculture mecca. In 1968, it was reported that there were 52,050 acres of marijuana in Kansas that grew throughout the town and along the Kaw River. This locally grown marijuana was sold on campus at places like the Gaslight, which used to sit where the Union parking garage is now, and the Rock Chalk Cafe, which was demolished in 2008 after 85 years to build the Oriat Hotel. The Gaslight and Rock Chalk Cafe were seen as the headquarters of the hippies, with the Rock Chalk Cafe selling fascist pig burgers for 35 cents. Music festivals were where youths would seek their place in society while rejecting the dictates of said society. These festivals are often known for their rampant drug use, and the 60s was a hot spot for these festivals. The largest and most known festival of the 60s was Woodstock, which ran from August 15th to 18th in 1969. It was located in New York and garnered 460,000 attendees, with 32 acts performing in sporadic rain. 4 months later, Altamont, the Woodstock of rock, was hosted at the Altamont Speedway in California. It gained around 300,000 attendees and was anticipated to be the Woodstock of the West. Many popular rock acts were slated to perform, such as Santana, Jefferson Airplane, and the Rolling Stones. Unfortunately, Altamont ended in disaster with 4 deaths and many injuries. Many reports say that this was due to management hiring the Hells Angels as security. Altamont is often contrasted with Woodstock, with one being peace and love and the other one being death. Altamont is viewed as the end of the hippie era, and the music critic Robert Christgau wrote in 1972 that writers focus on Altamont not because it brought on the end of an era, but because it provided such a complex metaphor for the way an era ended. Festivals were going on nationwide, and Kansas did not miss out. On Labor Day weekend of 1970, 10,000 to 25,000 residents and musicians gathered in a 160-acre field south of Kansas Highway 171. The Pittsburgh Peace Festival, that was affectionately known as Cornstalk, was a rock festival that was organized by Kansas natives Kenny Osana and Fulton Wilhelm. It featured 20 acts, including popular Kansas City rock band The Chessmen and an early iteration of Kansas. The California music group The Jerry Hahn Brotherhood made a surprise appearance, and Steve Gaines of Lynyrd Skynyrd both attended and participated in the festival. Like the large music festivals, there was plenty of illicit drug use that sparked outrage. Messages such as "Don't take the brown acid" blared over the speakers, and it was common to hear shouts of "black hash over here" or "get your organic mescaline in the gray van." When mixing high energy and mind-altering substances, there's often some truancy that occurs, and sometimes injuries. Unlike the larger festivals, these instances were small. There was a brief fire during the festival, and an 18-year-old had gotten run over by a car but survived. Later on, the police ended up arresting 2 16-year-old boys in connection to the incidents. Jamie Ortolani, a Kansas native that attended the festival when he was 13, said in an article that even now, if the fields are tilled, they sometimes sparkle due to the sheer number of beer tabs left behind. Though the music scene in Lawrence was small and slowly growing, Kansas has always been prominent in the music industry. As the Lawrence music scene has grown, it has slowly evolved and was a prominent spot for the 80s punk scene. Music venues, the Bottleneck, then known as Off the Wall Hall and later Cogburns, and the Jazz House opened throughout the 80s. While many local punk bands formed and went on to hold successful careers, the 90s brought several local rock bands and the opening of 2 music venues, the Replay and the 8th Street Tap Room. The Granada, which was formerly a vaudeville theater turned movie theater, began offering live music. Currently there are around 10 music venues in Lawrence, a far cry from the 3 in the 1960s, and the Gaslight has moved across the bridge to North Lawrence. The town has hosted many artists over the years, such as Ike and Tina Turner, Joan Baez, Snoop Dogg, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Bob Dylan. Without the musical influence of the 60s and the support of the student community, it is likely that the rich arts culture and lively music scene that we have now would not have formed.